Greetings. I'm Chris Dogelmar. I'm the Chief Impact Officer at Splunk. Thank you for being here today with us to talk about responsible AI for societal gains. And I do want to acknowledge you have a lot of choices of what sessions you attend. And so society is going to thank you for engaging in this critical, emerging, and complex topic. We have fabulous panelists here today, and so I want to really focus on their expertise and hopefully find time for Q&A. But before we start, I want to get a sense of who is in the room. So I'm going to say 3 describing statements and raise your hand if it's one of you. I am an expert in AI. I work and breathe it all day long. You're kind of the Stuart Russell in our panel. Anybody here on that? Okay. 2, I am knowledgeable about AI. You work in the data or impact field, but not directly in AI. Okay, large number of hands. Or I am new and learning about AI. Like, this is just brand new. Okay, good. So, Stuart, just giving you, we don't have all of your students here in the room today. Okay.
You soon will be.
Exactly. So I'm going to do a quick overview, then I've got questions for the panelists, and then we're going to have a Q&A, and then we're going to do a quick wrap-up. And I am going to start with Joanna Shields, who is the CEO of Benevolent AI. And it is a company that combines advanced AI, machine learning, with cutting-edge science to decipher complex disease biology and discover optimum therapeutic interventions. But what is particularly amazing about Joanna is she started in the early days of Silicon Valley. So she's done the Google, the Facebook, and she's also been the Parliamentary Undersecretary of State for Internet Safety and Security in the UK. So she has every sector covered there. Next, we've got Vilas Dar, is the president and trustee of the Patrick McGovern Foundation, and he is a leading voice in civil society on equity and dignity in AI, and also and AI solutions. And he has also previously been a lawyer and an entrepreneur, and now leads this multi-billion-dollar foundation. And I love this. His everyday purpose is to center human creativity, empathy, and opportunity in our shared digital future. So we should all have such a compelling purpose. Next, we have Omar Sultan Al-Alama, and I have to read his title because it's the longest. Who is a QR code for that. I know there is. Who is the Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence, Digital Economy, and Remote Work Applications at the Office of the Prime Minister of the United Arab Emirates. And similar, prior to this role in government, he has also worked in the banking sector, telecommunications, and different areas in government. And what is also exciting for this is the UAE is really trying to lead in AI by 2031. And then at the end is the probably biggest mind in the room, is Stuart Russell, is the professor of computer science at the University of Berkeley, my alma mater, so I'm a little bit biased there. And Stuart founded the Center for Human-Compatible Artificial Intelligence, whose goal is to develop the conceptual and technical wherewithal to reorient AI towards a beneficial system. And he has written the most popular textbook on AI in the world. So fascinating panelists today. So before I start with those questions there, I want to just frame 3 aspects of AI that we're going to try to delve into, and they're all related but different, but I think speaks to the complexity of this emergence of what we're facing. 1, which is good, AI is relevant to all the SDGs, so we need more of it to help solve our social and environmental challenges. However, AI is like the emergence of the data divide, which is currently inequitable and unevenly distributed. So we've got it stronger in the corporate sector, government pretty uneven, some areas really strong. In civil society, it is behind the corporate sector, starting to see progress. And then in academia, was at Stanford for many years, it's not always the case that faculty are incentivized to solve our global challenges. They should put that of how you get tenure. And then lastly, AI has 2 sides. huge opportunity, the bright light to help us solve, and also has a potential dark side of the risk to perpetuate and expand historical inequities, prejudice, and misinformation. Complex, messy, and emerging. So we're gonna jump in, and I'm gonna build off the experts of our panelists, and I'm gonna start out with you, Joanna, and I'm gonna read this.
Okay.
You wrote a blog in 2020 where you stated the following about your early days in Silicon Valley. It was an exciting and even intoxicating time, kind of like it is with AI right now. But no one stopped to calculate the unintended consequences. Nobody thought of the potential misuse by malign actors. Okay, so now as the CEO of Benevolent AI, and she is also the co-chair of the Global Partnership on AI, what concretely needs to change to mitigate those unintended consequences? And then how are you incorporating those learnings into your work at Benevolent AI?
Thank you. I'll give you some context for that sentiment. That sentiment actually led me to a decade of work combating online harms and crimes. I was an executive at Facebook when I was taken into the inner sanctum of the Home Office in the UK. And I saw at the National Crime Agency how online abuse was being perpetrated against children on our platforms. And you know, it's one of those things that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So it set me on a path of really organizing as many people as I could get their attention into an organization called the We Protect Global Alliance, which I founded in 2014, which now has 98 countries. It's a multi-stakeholder organization with over 50 technology companies and NGOs working in concert to combat online child sexual exploitation and abuse. And that journey, it's interesting, it was that realization and that wake-up call that I had a parallel thought when we started seeing the emergence of AI and machine learning. And it seemed to me like we couldn't, as a society, sit back and allow the same mistakes to perpetuate. And we had to do something, and we had to get the organizing principles in place to establish organizations like the Global Partnership on AI, which is another multi-stakeholder organization that's led by experts, domain experts, who advise the governments who are participants in how to deploy and develop and deploy ethical AI for society. So I just wanted to kind of, you know, put those two organizations on your radar. What I do today, in addition to these organizations, is for the past 4 years, we've been heads down building a biomedical representation of knowledge across all the drug discovery sector. So all the research journals, peer-reviewed journals, all the exponentially growing amounts of data and information that's being generated by health records and patents and chemical structures, all those things we are merging together and building AI and machine learning tools that enable scientists to understand disease biology and to uncover unknown targets, disease targets in that biology. So one of the main reasons why drugs fail in the clinic is you have the wrong target at the outset. The other thing that is not known, but there's over 7,000 diseases that have no treatment or are poorly treated or poorly served by science. And that is because biology is complex and diseases are multifactorial, they are complex. And the reality is that if we don't give scientists tools that enable them to reason across all the world's biomedical information, they will not have the capability to understand the mechanisms that are driving disease development. So we started out by doing that. We're now a commercial company with partnerships with leading pharma, and we are actually delivering, we have 20 drugs in our own pipeline that were developed using this platform.
Have you then incorporated those principles you're talking about actually into your business? Do you have like checkoff lists? Do you have the data scientists paying attention to those?
Yeah, we follow ethical AI principles. We're a purpose-driven organization. There's a lot of talk right now about a shortage of people wanting, to join companies. We have no shortage of people because there's a whole generation of people that want to be involved in something that has the potential to impact hugely on society. And that purpose, really shines through in all that we do. And, it's really a guiding light for everyone at Benevolent. In fact, when you walk into the lobby, it says "because it matters" in neon. And that's kind of the sentiment that drives everyone to get this right this time and make a good impact.
Okay, we can write somebody. I don't tweet, but if you want to tweet, it's supposed to be #WEF22. Okay. Sorry. So Veloce, your foundation does, I know Veloce leads in the implementation of AI to solve the great human challenges. And you've been an advocate for cross-sector engagement and reshaping the public narrative. And because we're in the field, we know how far behind the social impact organizations are. So what does a world empowered by AI look like to you? What do we need to realize that vision? And what are you doing to get philanthropy to do more?
Thanks, Chris. Maybe let's start by injecting a little sunlight into the gloom and doom of what we've seen here, the rain outside and everything else, right? I am very much an optimist, and AI is transforming our world. These are pretty obvious statements, I think, to many of us in the room, but I look at the use of AI technologies to enable a frontline climate defender who's sitting and protecting forests from poaching, a refugee who's coming across borders and oceans and is trying to find work and has access to AI-enabled credentialing, to the delivery of frontline healthcare in low-resource environments where governments can make better decisions because AI is helping them figure out how to deliver population-level health. These are incredible things that are happening now. And Chris, if you say that the social impact sector isn't quite caught up to the commercial sector, we also have a sense of why that is. I'll suggest that it's a matter of social priorities. That while we are very willing to equip our technologists with billions of dollars in R&D capital and say, go and build things because they're interesting, we ask the people at the front lines of human challenges to use a pretty limited toolkit, limited funding, limited technical capacity, and not yet those great case examples.
Amen.
So we've set out to try to change this, Chris. As a foundation, we've made a commitment that this year we'll invest $75 million in equipping nonprofits across the world to build the talent, the tools, and the institutions necessary to create a new form of AI. One that enables people who are right at the point of vulnerability to defend those who need it and to create economic opportunity for those who can seek it. We also think that civil society has a really important role to play beyond the adoption of these technologies. We need to start from a place where the public conversation we have isn't merely dominated by technologists and regulators, but actually has the voice of communities, of those who are closest to problems coming in and saying, let's center not just technological opportunity, but human dignity. I think a lot, pretty much every day, about my nieces and nephews. My 11-year-old nieces and nephew, Ariana and Sean, my 6-year-old nephew, Dylan, and the world that they're gonna live in. And I often balk at the term responsible or ethical AI. To be honest, as a technologist, as a civil society leader, as a philanthropist, I'm not so concerned that we put the responsibility for ethics on the technology. I'd rather we build a responsible and ethical society, empowered by the incredible opportunity of AI, but where we're grounded in pretty basic principles of human decency. I think if we can get the civil society sector together with technology and government to create that world, now we've got something that really will excite all of us.
I love that. So, an ethical society. So let's keep that in mind. Thanks, Veloce. That was great. So we've got business, we've got kind of the philanthropy. Now we're kind of moving to a government perspective. Minister Sultan Al-Alama, congratulations on the UAE's leadership. And I was listening to some of his talks, and I love this statement. You stated that your job as a minister is to serve the people and ensure technology benefits the people with responsible deployment. And can you share some of the specific steps the UAE has taken to tackle that job? And then secondly, again, you're ahead of the curve. What advice would you have for other governments here or listening to this to just start the journey?
Thank you very much. And I'm really honored to be on this panel with such an esteemed group of, whether it's creators of AI or deployers of AI, or really the thought leaders that are shaping the future of AI. So the UAE is a very ambitious country. I think probably from this panel, the only person I knew when I was first appointed was Stuart, just because it was my job to know what he does. But we met many times over many discussions. And we needed to actually have a point of view of what should we do as a government. And I spent the first few months trying to understand what is the one fundamental issue that I need to tackle in the first 100 days or in the first 6 months of my job. And the answer was we needed to tackle and combat ignorance within the decision-making process. We talk about responsible AI. We talk about the good and bad of AI. But these are experts sitting in expert panels talking about it. But the people that are going to be pulling the plug or pressing the button on whether to deploy it or not are people who have no idea what ethics means, what the repercussions are, what black box algorithms mean, what are the long-term implications of these technologies are. So right off the bat, we signed a strategic agreement with Oxford University to actually send our government officials to school. So if you are a director or chief director of technology within the government department, you actually have to go through an 8-month course at Oxford, understand what the ethics of AI are, understand good uses of AI, bad uses of AI. How do you actually make that decision? Should you deploy or shouldn't you deploy? How can you at least ask the right questions to ensure that this deployment does not come and haunt you in the future? And this team of people actually became our army that today deploy AI in a much more responsible manner within the government. We have 240 graduates to date, and we have a current batch of around 60 people currently going through the program. But then we also said to ourselves, there are so many companies coming and knocking on the door saying, we have this application, we have this use case. And we had to ask ourselves, what will serve as a starting point for what we should deploy and what we shouldn't deploy? And we said, let's move away from the controversy. There are certain applications that people know are controversial. Let's park them for now until the discussion becomes more mature. There are certain things that we know for a fact the negative repercussions of are going to be limited. So deploying AI for infrastructure development. How do we reduce the resources necessary to build roads, bridges, build more efficiently, increase safety for people, ensure that traffic flow and people flow is better, improve quality of life through that. So that's one application that we think is incredible. How can we deploy AI in logistics? So if something arrives into the port in the UAE, you're able to get it in your home in a very seamless manner, and we're able to forecast later on what we should plan for in the future. So think about it this way. A friend of mine who leads a very big, I would say, supply chain institution within the UAE said that the UAE is one of the only countries on earth that if something is ordered as a supply chain requirement, 85% of the time it's fulfilled completely because of the forecasting models that they have of ordering before the need actually comes. So we're able to order and optimize. Most countries are around 70%. If you deploy AI here, you can actually increase that to reaching 80 or 90 or 100%. And we saw that clearly with the vaccines. So our vaccination rollout was one of the best in the world. We only had lockdowns for 6 weeks, and we had vaccine availability for everyone. Why were we able to do that? It's because we forecasted that we needed to order X number of vaccines from these providers to ensure that we have a vaccine for every single individual. So there are uses of AI that are non-controversial, that improve quality of life, and ultimately are responsible. We today are deploying AI for quality of life. It's not for economic reasons. The economy will come second after we solve the controversial aspects of job loss and other controversies that maybe my fellow panelists will touch upon.
I'm from the US that is having severe supply chain problems right now. And so your forecasting might be something you want to help many of us other governments out there today. So thank you for that. So Stuart, you've pioneered human-centered AI design, and you've been on a number of expert groups on the development and governance of AI, from nuclear to health. We could go on and on. And we do know the deployment is moving at this really fast pace. And with your diverse experience, what's the best way to leverage those benefits in preparing for the next generation? And so I know when we talked, you have some examples in education. So how could we deploy maybe AI in education and also consider the safeguards that are needed?
Thanks, Chris. So I think you're probably all aware that there has been lots of progress in AI in the last decade or so, mainly driven by machine learning. And current machine learning works very well for tasks that are data-rich and often knowledge-poor, where you really have no alternative but to use machine learning. And I would say the quintessential application has been recommendation systems, which drive a huge amount of the online economy. So they work quite well, much better than random recommendations. So for example, if you buy a bottle of wine, you'll suddenly find ads for wine popping up all over the place. But they're still pretty stupid. So if you buy a vacuum cleaner, you'll find ads for vacuum cleaners popping up all over the place, even though you don't need another vacuum cleaner because you just bought one. So this problem of current machine learning systems is precisely that they're knowledge poor. They don't understand the difference between wine and vacuum cleaners, and so they malfunction in amusing ways. There are other technologies that have been developing much more under the radar. So I'll throw out one keyword: probabilistic programming languages, which is a technology that unites essentially Turing machines, the ability of universal machines to implement any computable function, with probability theory, which is the calculus for learning from evidence and making predictions. So the combination of those two is incredibly powerful, and it's a rapidly growing area, exponential increase in the number of publications. I think 2,500 papers published just last year, and big groups emerging in all the major tech companies. And this is really important because when you think about the big societal needs, and I would say the big needs are health and education. There's an awful lot we actually know. For example, in health, we know that humans have bodies. Only one of them, right? There's no deep learning system that actually knows that humans have bodies or how many bodies we have, right? How many hearts are in that body? How many brains are in that body? How many kidneys, right? The deep learning systems know absolutely nothing about this. They also don't even know that we want to be alive. So all of that should give you pause as to whether you want to just dump vast quantities of data into a big black box machine learning system and then have it deliver healthcare to the world, right? So what do we know about, we know a great deal about human physiology. We know a great deal about disease processes. We have massive sets of information about drugs, their mode of operation, and so on. On the other hand, same goes for education. In education, there's sort of two parts to it. How do people learn? And then what is the content that we want to teach? And do our systems actually understand that content? So we have lots of tutoring systems out there that are automated, and they're fairly effective. But they don't actually understand mathematics. They also can't really talk to you. So it would be like me trying to teach string theory, which I don't understand, in Laotian, which I don't speak. Right? It would be very hard for me to be a good string theory lecturer in Laos. And that's the situation that most so-called intelligent tutoring systems are in. But with the capability of representing and reasoning with knowledge, and some of the new technologies coming along for language understanding, I think we can make a huge dent in that. But both of these applications require big upfront investments, and that's what isn't happening in most places. Instead, it's much easier to pick off a little piecemeal piece of this pie, like, okay, I'm gonna develop an arithmetic tutor, and I'm gonna get funding for my startup, and then I'm gonna try and sell it to school districts or parents or whatever it might be. And this piecemeal approach is never going to have the societal scale impact that we want. So these big upfront investments have to be done, I think, collectively, and they amortize across the entire population of the world, because we all have bodies, and they're all pretty much the same. And so making those investments is something that requires a collective activity across academia, hospital systems, government health departments, and so on. But it can deliver enormous value if we can make it work. And there are examples of this that are starting. So there's a Cell Collective, which is doing a collective effort to build a systems biology model of everything we know about the cell and how the individual cells work. There are other scattered efforts to do physiology. There's physiome.org and various other organizations. So I think there's a good chance that we can, in this decade, get over that hump if we organize ourselves effectively. Chris also asked about the downside risk.
So here, I'm going to build off that. I think we might close with the downside. So, and why I want to just connect this. So you're talking about, I'm just going to summarize, big investment. You know, instead of these bespoke projects, how do we think? We're not going to get the benefit of AI and ML until we have the big infrastructure. Veloz was in a meeting with philanthropists this morning. We have government representatives. What are some of your ideas of what it would take to mobilize some of those investments at scale?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I had a great opportunity this morning to meet with Bill Gates and Secretary John Kerry and philanthropists around the world that are trying to think about climate. And I think of so many parallels to the technological transformation that's coming. It will affect every single one of us, but it will affect our most vulnerable in the most meaningful ways. So what does it take? Well, for me, the answer, Chris, is participation. It's something we don't talk about enough, particularly around AI. The number of people who are making decisions about our technical future are very small. We don't think they're the wrong people. We just know that there are not enough voices in that conversation. So prioritizing inclusion. I think of challenges like we work with an amazing group of indigenous AI scientists that are figuring out how to apply large language models to dead and dying indigenous languages, to capture the wisdom of families and societies that have gone for thousands of years and bring them into modern use. I think about diversity. We're focusing on these questions of fundamental equity. How do we cite talent around AI in places around the world that would never be the first place you'd think of as AI experts? On accessibility, how do we make sure that differently enabled people are able to use these tools? But as you think about those challenges, what you come up with is an understanding that bringing more people into the conversation brings more resources in. And I don't think the answer is we need to put more money into AI foundational development. Instead, we need to spend the resources to make sure this is a common and public conversation.
A public and common conversation, building that public and common big data. Just when you're in government conversations, how did you get across why did your government get across the finish line to prioritize this, do you think, compared to others?
So, you know, when you think about why the UAE is looking at AI seriously, everyone's talking about AI being the most important technology for the future. I would say that it's the most important technology today because we are already using it in many different sectors and fields, but no one's really doing anything about it. And if there is a government official that looks at it, that person looks at it in a very broad theoretical perspective. We understand as a country that we are leading in certain sectors. The only way we'll be able to maintain our leadership advantage is through the deployment of AI. And if we are going to improve quality of life, and we're going to compete with countries like Switzerland, for example, to attract the best talent, we need to ensure that AI is used in government to tailor the government service, to make it more proactive rather than reactive, and also ensure that these people do feel like they're at home when they're in the UAE. I want to just mention one thing that touches upon Stuart's point, as well as the other points that were mentioned, which is the incentives today are not aligned. You're talking about developing, AI solutions for bigger problems, but the incentives are not there. There is no economic opportunity, and that is why everyone is developing AI solutions for, ad targeting for people, developing AI solutions that do not really create that positive future that we're looking towards. Let's take a page from history. When climate change became an important calling card for everyone, and it's a challenge that everyone thought is necessary for us to to cooperate on and actually overcome, governments put billions of dollars for climate research, for climate solutions that the US government put, the European governments put, even the UAE government put. I think there needs to be an understanding that there needs to be incentive alignment between all governments on the problems. Let's choose one problem. AI for climate, or AI for social good, whatever it is. And let's align the incentives. If we do that, we're not going to have everyone going into social media and ad targeting. We're going to have people looking at actual AI solutions that change the world for everyone.
Joanna, do you want to add just real quick? And then I am going to open it up for questions. So somebody has to be bold and go first. Joanna, what would you add?
I think the minister makes a very good point, because we as a society, we're shock absorbers, right? We're not thinking these things through in advance, and we're absorbing the shock. If you look at what's happening now with misinformation online, I mean, that problem was highlighted, a long time ago, that, algorithmic amplification of extremes was much more likely to spread and to propagate than happy thoughts, right? This is a known thing for 10 years since ad targeting systems developed. And here we are. I mean, we have mechanisms, like we have an apparatus that can be used by a state to move a country to war. And we're absorbing that shock as society. We had the issues with COVID, and we have to absorb, the shock as a society. And my concern right now is that there are so many shocks that this good work that needs to be done, these foundational elements, like all the points that are being raised, are not on the top of the agenda of any government at the moment, with all due respect.
Without incentive,
Yes.
And we need that group incentives. We need the group investing in the big aspect, not the bespoke.
Right.
So I'm going to take a pause. Who in the audience has a question? Okay, we'll go there, and then one over there. And just please say your name.
I'm Christine from Norway, and I have a question to the panel, and especially Mr. Dark. There's a lot of positivity in the panel, and I'm happy for that, and also ethical societies. Ethical societies is usually on good days. On bad days, like we see now in Russia, the Ukraine war, we see that how the Russians are behaving is not very ethical. And with artificial intelligence weapons, we see they send up a drone with facial recognition. They pick you out in a crowd and bang, you're out. And also now, as Jens Stoltenberg of NATO yesterday, warnings on especially China and Russia, and how they treat and then steal. That's actually what they do, copy our technology. I would like to hear your advice on how to protect the technology, the new artificial intelligence.
Philosopher, why don't you go first, then I'll go Stuart, Joanna, and then if you also want to add to that.
Sure. You have put your finger on the most critical challenge that faces our shared future, which is the fact that technologies are being developed out of the public eye. They're being implemented in ways that affect millions or billions of people without a public referendum on their use. And they're being implemented simply because we can. You speak of autonomous warfare. It is probably one of the greatest risks facing humanity today. We think about the application of AI in ways that prejudice against race, against economic class, against participation on any numbers of identity-based characteristics in a world that's at the same time polarizing among those same groups. So where I started my comments on this panel by telling you how much of an optimist I am, I'm also a realist. And I know the critical urgency of these conversations. In 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years, if we decide to go back and say, let's roll back some of the technologies we've deployed, let's change some of the decisions we've made, it will be too late. So what does that mean, right? Is there a path forward? And of course, I think there is. Let me be blunt and provocative. We have seen the exchanges between technology companies and regulators in the United States, many of us with a little bit of pain, as we realize the level of that discussion is nowhere near where it needs to be in order to create good policy. So we need to start by making sure that our policymakers are really quite fluent in these conversations, that our technologists understand that their stakeholder engagement, their connection to whatever form of ESG or impact they want to talk about is actually being activated in their decisions about AI, and that civil society, the protectors of human rights for at least the last 50 years, if not much longer, are directly in that conversation.
Great. I'm going to turn it to Stuart and just share. Stuart and I got to have coffee before, and we spent a little lengthy time on the dark side. I left going, wow, we've got a lot to do. So Stuart, over to you.
Yeah, so you mentioned autonomous weapons. There's been a campaign now for 8 years or so to try to bring about an international treaty. In fact, my introduction to the WEF was a meeting in Dubai in November of 2014, where I happened to sit next to Michael Muller, who's director of the United Nations in Geneva. So he's in charge of all the treaties, and he helped bring autonomous weapons to the forefront of those negotiations in Geneva. But we have made very little progress, and unfortunately, I'm sad to say that the US and Russia are allied in Geneva in blocking progress on a treaty to ban autonomous weapons. And the example you gave of being able to assassinate a single individual is a real concern, and I can tell you politicians are really worried about that. But I think the bigger concern is the fact that once weapons are autonomous, someone can press a button and launch 1 million weapons at the same time and wipe out an entire city, an entire ethnic group, and creating that kind of weapon of mass destruction and making it available, unlike nuclear weapons, which are highly, guarded and secure, making these available through the arms markets of the world, which is already happening. This is an absolutely insane policy, and yet the US and Russia are both promoting it.
Joanna,
Yeah,
let's get to a little solution. So we have everybody engaged, we're going to just copy the program you've done of 8 months of AI for all of our government officials. Joanna.
there's another area, I hate to be a downer, but there is another area that is of great concern to me. And children are not thought of in policies around AI. We don't think about children, we think about, general society. I mean, there are toys that are reacting to children and collecting data. We are datafying these kids in ways that we've never experienced. And those toys are reacting or saying something to that child based on their choices. So we are moving to where children are going to be interacting with digital devices and toys that are actually learning from them. And that data is being collected. And I think that we really have to think about that as a society. Neural rights, like the right not to be manipulated by a device that runs AI and machine learning based on your choices, is a big deal. And it's not getting enough traction.
The right not to be manipulated.
It's not, neural rights are not getting enough attention right now. I know in Chile, they just put it into their Bill of Rights, which is a really bold statement for a government to do that. And I know there's some talk around it, there's some negatives around it. People are like, we don't need another set of rights, we just need to enforce these human rights. But the right for your brain not to be manipulated, just as a hierarchy of rights, is very important.
Great. Okay. Yeah, quickly, and then I want to get the next question. So be ready.
What I'm realizing is every single person is adding another negative paradigm. So there's a lot of pressure on me to add even something that's scarier.
You're in government. You're going to solve it all in the UAE.
Well, I think I need to come up with a solution. But what I am going to say, I think we're all trying to target AI. There are some very bad applications. But what really scares me is biotech. People saw what COVID did. It closed the world. You can buy a kit for $10,000 today and create the next pandemic. Right? I know there are conspiracy theories about this, but it is possible. It will be even more possible in the next 5 years. So there are a lot of problems that we need to address. However, the solution is in first identifying what the problems are, and then having dialogues like the dialogue that Stuart attended in Dubai in 2014, and dialogues like this, that ensure that there are stakeholders in the room. I want to know how many US officials, Russian officials, UAE officials are in the room when these conversations are happening. The more they feel the pressure of knowing what the problem is, the more they realize that they need to come up with the solutions for it. Dialogue is always good. The second thing that I just want to end this with is, the world has gone through so many catastrophes, so many unfortunate events, but what we have done as a human species over time is seen that problem and made it a rallying call for everyone to come up with a solution. We've done it. And I know that we will do it for AI, we will do it for these things. The question is, what would be the price for that catastrophe? If it's something very small or minute, then no one's going to worry about it. If it's something that wipes out a whole ethnic group, then it's a big loss for humanity. So we need to be proactive rather than reactive to that scenario.
Thank you. Okay, quick question, and we're probably just going to get to one or two panelists on that because I want them to have a quick one-sentence close.
Perfect. Hello, my name is Alejandro. I'm from Colombia. I'm a global shaper. We use AI to measure xenophobia and racism in Latin America. And I wanted to share on a higher note, to end on a higher note. So I would like to ask the panelists if you could share some good examples of using AI to solve complex problems. We regularly hear it in the sector of health, but I would like to go to other societal problems such as xenophobia, racism. Just if you could have some examples of how to use AI for good.
So why don't Joanna and Joanna and you can go, and then I want everyone to get a sentence in.
In terms of combating online abuse and exploitation, there's an organization called Thorn. It was started by Ashton Kutcher and Demi Moore, and they put enormous amounts of funding into detecting potential patterns in children's behavior online that might indicate they're being manipulated or abused. And they're working really well. I think the last figure I heard is they saved 17,000 kids from this fate, which is a big deal. And then you have UNICRI, the UN research agency that's working to bring together all of police forces around the world and share data around exploitation and abuse of children online. And it's all AI-based systems that automatically detect and identify potential problems.
Yeah, go ahead.
Take a minute so Stuart can continue on this. So one use case that to me is inspiring. We have a lot of programs in the UAE to protect wildlife, to save endangered species. And the programs usually were cameras and camera traps around the National Reserve and people sitting on the cameras trying to see what's happening. And there's a lot of trial and error to try to understand how do we affect positive behavior in these animals or try to reduce negative behavior. What we realized is certain trends were not caught by the human eye. So certain ways of movement that these animals had were not caught by the human eye because it looks like it's moving normally. But with time, we realized that an animal would walk a certain way if it ate plastic and it's choking, if it stepped on something that hurt it, and so on and so forth. So we launched a lot of programs to actually increase the number of these population of these animals, whether it's almaha or hubara, bastard birds, other kind of wildlife that today are being saved because of artificial intelligence. We shouldn't just look at AI for humans or AI for process optimization. We have to look at AI to create a better future and a better plan for our kids.
Great. Okay, we just have a couple minutes left, so
You want to give Stuart a chance?
Do you want to jump in real quick?
He looks ready.
And then
30
I'll
seconds.
go the next question. Yeah, go, quick,
30 seconds.
quick as a whistle.
So the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty bans testing of nuclear weapons anywhere in the world. An AI system is now up and running 24/7 in Vienna at the UN and has almost tripled the sensitivity of the global detection system for nuclear explosions.
Do you have a 15-second one?
We can talk about them later.
Okay, but yeah, come up for the hundreds afterwards. So thank you for that great question. So I want to go, we have limited time and they'll cut us off. So in one or two sentences for each of you, and Stuart, I'm going to start with you. What would be your number one priority to ensure responsible AI? Like if you've got to prioritize, what's the number one thing you do?
So I think I would want to regulate in very precise ways human-facing machine learning systems. So that includes the examples that Joanna talked about, where systems are manipulating children. Social media, talking of catastrophes, social media is already a catastrophe, and there's a very clear line from the way the machine learning algorithms work to what's happening in the world. The machine learning algorithms in these systems.
Other people that time.
Okay, right. The machine learning algorithms actually are designed so that they will manipulate people and change you into somebody different simply in order to maximize long-term revenue streams.
Regulation. Joanna.
Just really quick, I don't think any one company should own the metaverse. I think we have to be very careful that we don't have dominating companies in the metaverse. It's a very scary proposition.
Vilas.
We are not products. We are not consumers. We are not commodities. We have to be architects of our shared AI-enabled future.
Okay, that's all of us. You're wrapping us up.
No matter how big or small your country is, if you have the ambition to create a better future, you can take the first step and actually create that rallying call. We started in the UAE. I hope that we can continue with all our other partners. I just want to add one more thing. If you really care about what Stuart is saying, there's a great book called Computational Propaganda that actually brings a lot of these things to light. Thank you, guys.
Okay. With that, thank you to the great panelists.